18 years after they won their first Super Bowl in franchise history, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers won their second. After many losing seasons, they finally found their way back to the top. How did they do it? Well, some people may say that they just got Tom Brady and they were automatically contenders from there. While that is somewhat true, there were a lot of other moves going on other than acquiring Brady that set this team up for success, including drafting and developing a lot of homegrown talent to build around him. Just 6 years earlier in 2014, the Bucs were on the opposite end of the spectrum. Losing to the Saints in Week 17 clinched their spot as the number 1 pick in the draft with their 2-14 record. Just adding Tom Brady to the team would not take them from the bottom to the top, so let's take a look at how they got there. 2014 was a rough year, but the franchise now has an opportunity to turn it around for the foreseeable future. With the number 1 pick in their hands and 2 solid quarterback prospects leading the way in the draft, they have their choice on who will lead their franchise for the next few years. They didn't make any major additions in the offseason, as it really wouldn't make sense to go out and get a bunch of veterans for a team that is building for the future. They got a few guys that can fill roles in the meantime while they build via the draft. They did lose a few guys like Adrian Claiborne, Michael Johnson, and Mason Foster, but losing those guys is not that big of a deal, considering they were just part of a team that went 2-14. Leading up to the draft, there was a consensus number 1 pick in Jameis Winston out of Florida State. He'd won the Heisman in 2013 and was the best pro-ready quarterback in the class. The other option the Bucs had was to take Marcus Mariota out of Oregon. Mariota won the Heisman in 2014 and relied on his athleticism and mobility to make plays. The Bucs were expected to take the strong-arm pocket passer in Jameis Winston to pair up with their new number 1 wide receiver in Mike Evans, who they took in the first round in 2014. The Bucs GM Jason Licht ended up doing just that, as he selected Winston with the first overall pick. They then aimed to protect their number 1 pick by selecting back-to-back offensive linemen in the second round with tackle Donovan Smith and guard Ali Marpet. Quan Alexander was then selected in the 4th round. The coaching staff was similar to the 2014 staff. Lovie Smith donned the head coaching crown, but a new offensive coordinator was brought in to work with the number 1 overall pick in Dirk Koetter. Koetter would run the Air Coryell scheme, where the offense typically ran with the strong-arm pocket quarterback, which the Bucs now had in Winston, and the offense would use a lot of motion and primarily attack the defense in the mid to deep passing game, which in turn could open up running lanes. Leslie Frazier was the defensive coordinator, but Lovie Smith handled the defensive play-calling duties. The offense going into 2015 looked like this. Jameis Winston was of course the starting quarterback. The offensive line was almost completely different, as they had 2 rookies starting and 2 new starters going into the year. The running game would be led by Doug Martin, with Charles Sims playing the change of pace role and would get most of the passing down work. The receiving core had Mike Evans and Vincent Jackson as the clear 1 and 2, and undrafted rookie Adam Humphries would eventually win over the slot role. There were definitely some question marks with this offense, including the offensive line and the rookie quarterback. The defense is led by Gerald McCoy up front, and another rookie wins a starting job as Quan Alexander starts alongside star linebacker Levante David. The secondary is almost an entirely new unit. Chris Conte and Sterling Moore were brought in via free agency, and Bradley McDougald wins the full-time starting job after starting just 5 games in 2014. The team was able to muster a few wins, but the season just did not go well at all, and that's expected with a rookie quarterback and a team that's lacking a lot of experience. The turnovers killed the offense, and it also hurt the defense. On offense, Winston played okay. He did turn the ball over a lot, but was able to push the ball down the field at times. Doug Martin dominated on the ground and was rewarded with first-team All-Pro status. Mike Evans had a solid season receiving, and Charles Sims put up over 1,000 yards from scrimmage. Defensively, the team was led by Levante David and Gerald McCoy. McCoy led the team in sacks with 8.5. Conte and Alexander were both surprisingly effective in their first year with the team. If you know anything about team building in the NFL, you know rule number 1 is don't extend a running back with a big contract. Light, the Bucs GM, didn't listen to that, and he re-signed Doug Martin to a 5-year contract. Brent Grimes, J.R. Sweezy, and Robert Ayers were brought in to fill some gaps. Logan Mankins, one of the starting guards in 2015, retired. The draft this year was a little questionable, to say the least. If rule number 1 is not paying a running back, rule number -2 is drafting a kicker in the 2nd round. Yes, the Bucs needed a kicker, but a 2nd-round pick? If you've heard of Roberto Aguayo, it's probably for the sole reason that he was drafted in the 2nd round, as his kicking career never really took off. Vernon Hargreaves was selected in the 1st round to shore up the secondary. Lovie Smith is out as the head coach, and Dirk Koetter gets the promotion after commanding a good offense in 2015. Todd Monken and Mike Smith are brought in alongside Koetter in the coordinator positions. The offense is almost entirely the same. Winston is back for year 2, and the offensive line looks to gel together as they have 4 starters returning. Kevin Panfield steps in for Mankins, who obviously retired as we said before. Cameron Brate will now operate as the starting tight end. The defense, on the other hand, looks a little different. Ayers will now get the starts at defensive end, but other than Gerald McCoy, the front 4 looks lackluster. The linebackers, on the other hand, look great. Quan Alexander burst on the scene as a 4th-round pick, and Lavonte David is still here. Free agent Brent Grimes took over as the number 1 cornerback, and Vernon Hargreaves will start alongside him as he was the team's 1st-round pick. Jameis Winston took a step forward in year 2, throwing 28 touchdown passes, which was a franchise record for the Bucs. The run game, however, fell off a cliff. Doug Martin got injured in week 2 and only played in 8 games. They averaged just 3.6 yards per carry, which is not good. They also turned the ball over a lot again. Defensively, the team was pretty bad, but it could have been worse. They were able to generate a lot of splash plays and get turnovers, but just couldn't stop many offenses in the run or pass game. Somehow, though, the team came out with a 9-7 record, which barely missed the playoffs, but the stats as a team didn't look as pretty. Mike Evans made the Pro Bowl, and Cameron Brate had a solid year on the offensive side. Doug Martin was absolutely awful when healthy, and he wasn't healthy that often. See, kids, this is why you don't sign a running back to a long-term extension. If you want to know more about that, then you should watch my video about it. Defensively, Lavonte David was once again a standout player. Gerald McCoy led the team in sacks again with just 7, and the rest of the defense wasn't generating much pressure. Quan Alexander built on a solid rookie season with a good sophomore campaign, and free agent addition Brent Grimes played well in his first year with the team. In the offseason, Jason Licht went out and got some speed for the offense in the form of Deshaun Jackson on a 3-year, $33 million deal. He also looked to bolster the defensive line by signing Chris Baker to a 3-year deal. Vincent Jackson retired, and they lost starting safety Bradley McDougald. The athletic tight end O.J. Howard was the Bucs' first selection in the 2017 draft. Justin Evans went in the 2nd round, and Chris Godwin in the 3rd. The team was just out of the playoffs, so next year has to be the year, right? No. In fact, it got much worse. The coaching staff stayed the same for the 2017 season. The offense is still led by Winston, of course. Ali Marpet slides over to center, and J.R. Sweezy will now start at guard. The running back room is still the same, and now Deshaun Jackson is added as a speed threat on the outside. On the defensive side, Chris Baker joins the line as they look to generate more pressure this year. Justin Evans, the 2nd-round pick, will start at safety as he takes over for Bradley McDougald. The team would get off to a rough start as they were forced to take a bye week in week 1 due to Hurricane Irma, so the first game was week 2, which they won 29-7 against the Chicago Bears. Over their next 7 games, they went 1-6. They were back in the basement of the NFC South with a record of 5-11. The offense once again turned the ball over way too many times, but they were able to rack up the yards. A lot of those came in garbage time, and even though they had the 9th most total yards in the league, they were far from the 9th best offense. Their rushing attack was once again non-existent, and the defense was about as worse as it has been. They couldn't stop the run or pass, and it didn't help that the offense was turning the ball over so much. Looking at the notable players, Winston had his worst season by far, and he missed a few games due to a shoulder sprain. Doug Martin was absolutely awful again, as he just wasn't nearly as explosive anymore, and that contract is really not working out too well. Mike Evans eclipses 1,000 yards once again, and Deshaun Jackson had a disappointing year as the team's 2nd receiver. Defensively, Gerald McCoy led the team in sacks for the 3rd straight season, and this time he only had 6. That's just not going to get it done. McCoy made the Pro Bowl along with Quan Alexander, and Brent Grimes had another solid year in the secondary. The rest of the defense, though, was very bad. The Bucs now had a lot of cap space to work with, and they plan to use it in the offseason. They still have a quarterback on a rookie contract, which frees up a ton of money to spend elsewhere. They signed veteran Vinny Curry to bolster the defensive line and traded for Jason Pierre-Paul, giving up a 3rd and swapping 4th rounders. They also signed Ryan Jensen to a 4-year, $42 million deal after he played well with the Ravens for 4 years. Doug Martin was cut from the team before his 5-year deal was up, and they also lost Charles Sims. Probably addition by subtraction, as the running game has been non-existent since 2016. A new running back room and the addition of Jensen could change that though, and in the draft, Vita Vea was the 1st-round selection, a run-stopping defensive tackle out of Washington. Other notable picks were Ronald Jones, M.J. Stewart, Carlton Davis, Alex Kappa, Jordan Whitehead, and Justin Watson. The coaching staff remained the same, but they were all on thin ice after the disappointment in 2017. Winston was the quarterback again, but he would be serving a 3-game suspension to start the year for violating the league's personal conduct policy. Ryan Fitzpatrick would take his place in those games, who was a solid backup. Jensen immediately slots in at center, and Caleb Benenoch wins the right guard job after being drafted in the 5th round in 2016. The 2 new running backs are Peyton Barber and Jacquizz Rodgers. Barber went undrafted in 2016 and was decent in the few snaps he did get before winning the starting job in 2018. Rodgers would be the RB2 behind him. The receiving room was all the same going into 2018, with Mike Evans still leading the way. The defensive line was looking improved. Nassib was brought in on a minimum contract, and 1st-rounder Vita Vea was primed to stop the run. Jason Pierre-Paul, coming off the edge, finally gives his team a threat in the pass rush game not named Gerald McCoy. The secondary is very similar, except for the addition of rookie 2nd-rounder Carlton Davis, who would be thrusted into a bigger role after Vernon Hargreaves suffered a season-ending shoulder injury in Week 1. The Ryan Fitzpatrick-led Bucs started out the year 2-0 after beating the Saints and Eagles, but they would lose their 3rd game to the Steelers. Winston would come back in week 4, and they would give up 6 touchdowns to Mitch Trubisky and the Bears, losing 10-48. Yikes. They only could muster 3 wins for the rest of the year, finishing at 5-11. Giving up 6 touchdowns to Mitch Trubisky is a pretty big sign that the defense needs some work done to it. Offensively, they had one of the more efficient passing attacks in the league as they led the league in passing yards and were second in yards per attempt. But 35 turnovers is pretty much going to completely nullify any positive effect that would have on the team. Also, averaging just 3.9 yards per carry is not going to help much either. Turning to the defense, it was even worse. They were bottom 3rd in the league in just about any stat you can think of. The 6 touchdowns from Mitch Trubisky is starting to make a little more sense. Winston put up his best season in terms of QBR, but just couldn't stop turning the ball over. He threw 14 interceptions to just 19 touchdowns. Barber had a mediocre year, although it was much better than what Doug Martin was doing. Mike Evans put up the best year of his career, earning All-Pro honors to go along with it, and Chris Godwin emerged as a clear number 2 to Evans after working his way up the depth chart throughout the year. The defense was just not good, but Pierre-Paul finally gave this team some sack numbers, putting up 12.5. Carlton Davis had a solid season, and Jordan Whitehead had an okay one for a rookie. There were a few minor additions made in the offseason, bringing in Shaquille Barrett on a $5 million deal. Barrett was an undrafted rotational edge rusher for the Broncos. He did okay, but never really got the playing time to show what he's really capable of. Ndamukong Suh was also brought in for the defensive line to play inside and try to get some form of a run defense going. Tackle Donovan Smith was doing great and earned a 3-year, $40+ million extension. That draft class behind Jameis Winston with Smith and Marpet is starting to look pretty good. Just ignore when they drafted a kicker a year later. Quan Alexander would not get the extension though and would leave after his rookie contract expired. In the draft, Jason Light made another questionable selection, taking an off-ball linebacker in the top 5. Devin White at LSU was an uber-athletic linebacker who was capable of making huge plays but would often miss on the easy ones as well. If he was able to tap into that potential though, he could be a game-changing player on this Buccaneers defense. Light continued to address the defense as he should and took back-to-back corners in Sean Murphy-Bunting and Jamel Dean. Then took safety Mike Edwards and defensive end Anthony Nelson. And here we go again with the kicker. Okay, this time, at least in the 5th round. Scotty Miller was selected in the 6th and Terry Beckner in the 7th. The biggest change to this team though was the coaching staff. Some coaches were fired mid-season in 2018, others stayed till the end, but there would be a complete makeover in the offseason. Bruce Arians comes over from Arizona to take the head coaching job, Byron Leftwich is now calling plays on offense, and former Jets head coach Todd Bowles will call plays on defense. Offensively, the scheme will remain the same as it always has been, air it out with Jameis and get Evans and Godwin involved heavily in the passing game. The running game hasn't been there and it probably won't change over the course of an offseason, so just air it out. Defensively, Bowles would completely change the scheme. They are now going to go with a 3-4 defense and mix up the fronts. There's going to be a lot more aggressiveness, a lot more blitzes, stunts, things to try to generate pressure, which this team has been lacking for a long, long time. Winston is here once again, and at this point, it doesn't look like he will ever get to a ceiling that the Bucs saw when they drafted him number 1 overall, but he is here. The offensive line is finally in a place where you can look at and say this is a pretty good group. Smith, Marpet, and Jensen all played very well. Kappa earned the starting job going into 2019 as he was a 3rd rounder in 2018 and played well when he got the chance to. Dotson is getting up there in age but is fine on the right side. Chris Godwin deservedly gets the wide receiver 2 spot behind Mike Evans, and Perriman is now the wide receiver 3. Defensively, Barrett and Suh join the new defense under Todd Bowles, and Devin White joins in beside Levante David. The secondary also has a few new names in it, with 2 rookies in Edwards and Dean, and Whitehead now is the starting safety after a solid rookie campaign. They would start out 2-6, not looking good, and Jameis Winston's turnover problems were a big part of it. They went to London in week 6 where Jameis put on a stellar show of 5 interceptions and 2 lost fumbles. If that doesn't get the British into football, I just don't know what will. The next few games though will go a lot better, and they actually managed to finish at a 7-9 record, which is still bad, but not as bad as before. Offensively, it was much of the same. A lot of passing yards, not a lot of rushing yards, and 41 turnovers. Yes, 41, that is not a typo. Defensively, this team was a lot better, as Todd Bowles was looking like a mastermind. All of a sudden, they could stop the run. Bringing in Suh probably helped with that, as well as development of Vita Vea. They still gave up their fair share of passing yards though. Winston had one of the weirdest seasons of all time, over 5,000 yards and 33 touchdowns, but also threw 30 interceptions. You just can't win games when you turn the ball over that much. Ronald Jones did fine out of the backfield, and Evans and Godwin were great as a duo. Shaq Barrett thrived in Bowles' defensive scheme, putting up a near Defensive Player of the Year season with 19.5 sacks. Vita Vea was elite at stopping the run, and Carlton Davis continues to be a solid cornerback. Levante David is still here, doing well of course. This defense is getting better. The coaching staff looks like it finally knows what it's doing, the wide receiver room is arguably the best in the league, but Jameis is just throwing way too many interceptions. His contract is up, and there's a pretty high-profile free agent quarterback out there. Maybe the Bucs should check him out. And indeed they did. Tom Brady, welcome to the team. Along with him came Gronk in a trade for a 4th rounder. Antonio Brown comes in to provide, hopefully, some solid wide receiver play, and Leonard Fournette is brought in to be a running back in this committee. There were a couple notable losses, but they would replace. Wirfs was drafted to replace Dotson, and of course Brady replaces Winston. The Bucs picked Antoine Winfield Jr. in the 2nd round behind Wirfs. The coaching staff, of course, stays the same after the turnaround in 2019, and with Brady, this team is one of the favorites to win the NFC South for the first time in a while. The offense all of a sudden looks like a top unit in the league. Wirfs slides in at right tackle, and Fournette joins in at running back too. Gronk is now the tight end, of course, and Brady gets his short, white slot wide receiver in Scotty Miller to throw to. The defense is almost exactly the same, except Sean Murphy-Bunting will now start after Vernon Hargreaves leaves. As you can see, there's a lot of homegrown talent here. Guys that were drafted by Jason Light, the Bucs GM, and the Bucs obviously have done a very good job in drafting and developing these players. A lot of their 2nd and 3rd round picks have turned into legit starters in the NFL. It wasn't just Tom Brady that made this team good. To put a long story short, this team did pretty well. They were able to stop the pass and run efficiently and force their fair share of turnovers. The offense was pretty similar to what it has been the couple years, but Tom Brady is not going to throw 30 interceptions, which gave the offense a huge improvement in overall efficiency and scoring. They still didn't win the division though, as the Saints outdid them by 1 game with a record of 12-4. The Buccaneers would go into the playoffs as the 5th seed, but were heavy favorites against the 4th seeded Washington football team in the wildcard round. The football team finished the season at 7-9, but made the playoffs since they won the weak NFC East. On the opening drive of the game, Brady would complete a 30-yard throw to Evans and a 17-yard throw to Godwin, but they would have to settle for a field goal. Shortly after, Sean Murphy-Bunting would intercept a pass from quarterback Taylor Heineke, and the Bucs would drive down the short field and score a touchdown on a 36-yard pass to Antonio Brown. The football team would answer with a touchdown of their own, and then Godwin would catch a touchdown pass after a quick drive, and the Bucs led at halftime 18-7. The football team trimmed the lead to 18-16 by the end of the 3rd quarter, but Brady would turn it on in the 4th, and Fournette would run in for a touchdown from 3 yards out. The Bucs would win this one 31-23. Now heading on to the divisional round, they were against the Saints, who they lost to twice in the regular season. Not the best matchup for the Bucs. The Saints would get 2 field goals on the board early on, but Sean Murphy-Bunting would get another interception and returned it to the 3-yard line, where Brady would throw a touchdown pass to Mike Evans. The Bucs were then met by a familiar face as Saints backup quarterback Jameis Winston threw a 56-yard touchdown pass to Traquan Smith on a trick play. The Bucs would tie the game up just before half to make the score 13-13. Brees came out slinging in the 3rd quarter and ended a 75-yard drive with a 16-yard touchdown pass to Traquan Smith. The Bucs would punt the ball away and get the ball back on an Antoine Winfield forced fumble, which led to a touchdown pass to Fournette. The Bucs forced a punt and were held to a field goal, giving them the lead with just 10 minutes left in the game. Brees would throw 2 more interceptions, one allowing the Bucs to score another touchdown, ending the game with a score of 30-20. The only team left standing between them and the Super Bowl was the 1-seeded Green Bay Packers. The Packers finished the year at 13-3 and had soon-to-be MVP Aaron Rodgers leading the offense. On the first drive of the game, Evans would catch a touchdown pass from Tom Brady. A few drives later, Aaron Rodgers would lead the Packers on a 90-yard drive that ended with a 50-yard pass to Marquez Valdes-Scantling. On the very next drive, a 52-yard pass to Chris Godwin would set up a Leonard Fournette rush for a touchdown from 20 yards out. Green Bay would close the gap a little bit with a field goal, and now the score sat at 10-14. Brady was able to connect with Scotty Miller before the end of the half to extend the lead to 11. Right out of the half, Jordan Whitehead would strip the ball from Aaron Jones, setting the Bucs up in great field position. A beautiful play-action play would then net the Bucs their 4th touchdown of the game, making the score 28-10. The Packers would get a touchdown and then another touchdown after Brady was picked off. Brady would throw another interception, but Shaq Barrett would sack Rodgers to force a punt. The Bucs would get the ball back, but Brady would be intercepted once again, putting on his best Jameis Winston impression, but Shaq Barrett would save the day again with a sack. The Bucs were finally able to get the ball down the field and convert a field goal. The Packers were able to get themselves in position to get a tying touchdown, but head coach Matt LaFleur opted to take the field goal on 4th and goal instead. This allowed the Bucs to run out the clock and win the game, sending them to the Super Bowl. In one of the more iconic Super Bowl matchups of all time, Tom Brady and the Bucs faced off against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, the greatest quarterback of all time against the greatest quarterback today. The Chiefs would get on the board first with a field goal in the first quarter, but it wouldn't be long for the Bucs to respond, and who else than Tom Brady to rob Gronkowski for the first touchdown of the game. They wouldn't be as successful on their next drive when they turned it over on 4th and goal. After a few penalties going their way, the connection struck again, with Gronkowski scoring his second touchdown of the game. The Bucs defense continued to bend but not break after surrendering another field goal to make the score 14-6. With more penalties by the Chiefs defense, the Bucs were once again able to drive down the field and score a touchdown in the form of a 1-yard pass to Antonio Brown. The Chiefs were still unable to cut through the Buccaneers' tough defense as they mustered one more field goal for the rest of the game. Leonard Fournette scored a touchdown and Ryan Suckup connected on a 52-yard field goal to make the final score 31-9. Brady won Super Bowl MVP, but the defense was the key to victory, holding the electric Chiefs offense with Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, and Travis Kelce to just 9 points. They racked up 27 pressures, 4 sacks, and 2 turnovers. While Mahomes was pressured 27 times, Tom Brady was pressured just 4 times all game. It goes to show you how much better the Bucs were up front on both sides of the ball and how important that aspect of team building is to winning a Super Bowl. Just like that, the Buccaneers were back on top. Just 6 years after being on the bottom at 2-14, all it took was a new coaching staff, a new defensive scheme, a couple of good draft picks, and a lot of homegrown talent. And of course, the GOAT, Tom Brady.